Hey everybody, so another video edition of local natural resource observations. I spoke to a neighbor recently who told me a couple interesting stories. One was that someone out fishing had seen a killer whale quite a ways up the river here. So it's kind of like, well, you've got, the salmon coming in and everything, and I guess they're following that. What's going on out in the ocean conditions, though, that's, sending a killer whale 10 miles up the Columbia River. But the other thing that he told me was that his wife had been just kind of sitting in the house. They're right down along the river, and had seen something big and black just jump out of the water real quick and like make a big splash and then just submerged and disappeared. And she saw it like right down by our pilings down here. And it's somewhat shallow in there. Uh, I don't think it was a killer whale, but it was kind of interesting because I said, "Well, I haven't really heard any, sea lions lately." And he was like, "Yeah, I really haven't either, or whatever." And the thing that he said was, it's kind of um, weird because you'd think they would be there because there's fish in the river, right? I mean, there's like the killer whale coming up, but yet we don't hear. And usually when the sea lions are here, you can hear them throughout this whole lower Columbia because they're loud. I mean, not always, they're not, you know, mindless chatterboxes or whatever, but you'll hear them usually. So it made me think. One of the things that's interesting about where we are down on the river is that the way that the dynamics work of the Columbia, things that are floating in the river get washed up right here. So it's actually been a big enough deal, this whole strip along here for several miles, that the counties had these discussions about how it puts this undue burden on the coroner's office because we have so many bodies that wash up here. Now we've of course had dead sea lions pop up here in the past a couple times, and trust me, they smell awful. But okay, so one of the things that I think Sasquatch does in order to exist as a very large creature is they use waterways for transport. Uh, it's not something that we pay that close of attention to. That we're gonna okay if we see a head bob up occasionally and drop back down. It's like, well, what was that? I have no idea. And you just go on with your day, because you think, well, must have been, a river otter at just the right angle, or something like that, whatever. But just as far as their need for conservation of energy, of camouflage, and then a food source, it's all right there in the water. So I do think that they use, our waterways extensively, much more than we've um, really looked at. Okay. So, the way that I think these creatures move around the valley, I think this is one leg of their, or this whole region in the lower Columbia, I think this is one leg of their journey, right? So they can work in the uplands, and then when they want to come back downriver, they go and they work up way up in the highlands, and you can imagine how arduous that's going to be. And when they want to come back and start the loop again, they just jump in the river and they float down. And especially if they're doing it during salmon runs, okay, well, that's a food source. And they float down, and the river does all the work for them. And then they pop up in an area like this. And I'm not saying that's what my neighbor saw, but I think it's one of those things we need to take into consideration. And the other interesting thing is, probably heard people in the past, Sasquatch researchers, say, well, when these creatures are around, we think there's probably less other large predators, right? Less bears, less mountain lions, which is probably true. They're just such a massive presence that I'm assuming pretty much everything else is like, okay, let's get out of here. Um, and so, if we're going to talk about what's going on in these rivers and include the potential of, because everybody always thinks, where do you go look for Sasquatch, right? You go look for Sasquatch way out in the mountains. You don't go look in a river. Um, but if we are going to watch for patterns of Sasquatch in a river, we need to take into consideration things like, well, maybe if Sasquatch is hunting these fish runs, then we don't hear a lot of sea lions, even though they should be there. But there is a killer whale because a Sasquatch isn't going to tangle with a killer whale, right? Like, I'm not saying that that's the scenario what's going on, but I think that's what we would expect. If Sasquatch is real and they use rivers for transport and they need to eat while they're in those rivers and other creatures are there as well, I mean, we have to take these same predator models that we are speculating on terrestrially and apply it to river systems. So, anyways, that's my thoughts on that. And maybe some people think, hey, that's way out there. But to really understand these creatures, I really think that we need to pursue some of these less traveled roads. All right. Thanks for tuning in.